A retired SWAT officer sought peace in the mountains with his loyal K-9, far from the noise of war. But when a group of reckless men hurt the only friend he had left, they didn't just spill blood. They awakened something they could never control, the ghost of a soldier who once swore he'd never fight again. Until now. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves your heart, please subscribe for more. The morning mist clung to the towering pines of Silver Valley, Colorado, as if afraid to let the earth breathe. The air was sharp with the scent of pine resin and damp soil, the kind of cold that seeped through flannel and bone alike. Deep in those woods stood a lone log cabin, solid, weathered, its cedar walls darkened by years of mountain rain. Smoke rose weakly from the stone chimney, curling toward a pale sun. Inside, Ryan Hale sat by the window with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands. Ryan was a man shaped by years of violence and silence alike. At 42, his body still bore the disciplined strength of his SWAT years. Broad shoulders, a back straight as a rifle barrel, and eyes the color of cold iron. His face was sharply defined, with a jawline hidden beneath several days of dark stubble. A faint scar crossed his left cheek, a gift from a hostage rescue gone wrong in Detroit 6 years earlier, the day he lost his partner and, with him, his faith in orders. That moment had changed him. It had hollowed something out of his soul, leaving behind only the quiet need to disappear. He lived now with Ranger, a 7-year-old German shepherd whose coat shimmered between black and tan like twilight fur. Once a K-9 unit trained for tactical raids, Ranger carried the same battle-worn dignity as his owner. A faint limp haunted his right hind leg, a reminder of shrapnel wounds from an explosion in Kabul that Ryan never forgave himself for. The dog moved slower now, but his amber eyes still burned with unyielding alertness. Together, they were two ghosts bound by loyalty and loss, keeping each other's silence alive. The morning passed in quiet rhythm, the scrape of a knife on firewood, the hiss of boiling coffee, Ranger's steady breathing by the door. The cabin was small but meticulously ordered, tools on hooks, rifles oiled and locked, a single photograph on the shelf. Ryan and Ranger in uniform, younger, unscarred, framed by the chaos of a war-torn street. Ryan sometimes caught himself staring at that picture until the edges blurred, as if the memory might reassemble into something that didn't hurt. A knock broke the silence. 3 slow, deliberate taps against the wooden door. Ranger rose instantly, ears erect, a low growl humming in his chest. Ryan's hand brushed the pistol holstered at his side before he relaxed. Only one man knocked like that. He opened the door to see Thomas Beck, his neighbor from half a mile east. Beck stood tall for a man pushing 70, his frame lean but wiry, wrapped in a faded green military jacket that still bore a faint patch of the Marine Corps emblem. His face was a road map of wrinkles and sun damage, his skin the weathered bronze of someone who had worked the earth more than half his life. A gray beard framed his mouth, and his eyes, pale blue and steady, held the kind of calm that came only from seeing too much. "Morning, son," Beck said, his voice gravelly, like tires on a dirt road. He lifted a wicker basket. "Figured you could use something fresh." Inside lay 2 fat trout, still glistening with lake water. Ryan stepped aside and motioned him in. "You didn't have to hike all the way up here for that." "Didn't want 'em to go bad," Beck replied, setting the basket on the counter. "Besides, I needed to stretch my legs. Cold keeps the joints honest." He glanced around the cabin, nodding in approval. "You've settled in well. A good place for a man to be left alone." "That's the idea," Ryan said, pouring another mug of coffee and handing it to him. Beck took it with a grunt of thanks, then leaned his elbows on the rough wooden table. "You heard about that developer down in Copper Creek? Name's Vincent Ward. Word is he's been buying up half the valley. Farms, old mills, even the ranger station. Says he's building some luxury ski resort." Ryan frowned. "That's 40 miles of land. Why buy that much wilderness?" Beck's smile was humorless. "Because he can. Folks around here are getting spooked. Ward's men show up, wave a fat check, and if you don't sell, they start making life unpleasant. Fences cut, tires slashed, livestock missing." He sipped his coffee, then added quietly, "You got a good patch of land here, son. 20 acres. You might want to keep an eye open." Ryan stared out the window at the fog-laced trees. "If he comes here, he'll get a polite, 'No.' That should be enough." Beck gave a dry chuckle. "Polite doesn't mean much to men like him." He pushed back his chair and rose. "Just be watchful, Ryan. This valley doesn't forgive complacency." When Beck left, the forest swallowed him, his silhouette fading into mist. Ryan stood by the doorway for a long while, feeling the weight of the man's warning. The wind had picked up, stirring the branches into a whisper that sounded almost like speech. Ranger pressed against his leg, sensing his unease. "Easy, boy," Ryan murmured, scratching behind the dog's ear. "We're fine." But he didn't believe it. The rest of the day stretched uneasily. He chopped wood, fixed a loose window hinge, cleaned his rifle, but the rhythm that usually calmed him now only fed his tension. He couldn't shake Beck's words. Too many times in his life had he seen small signs ignored until they became disasters. He told himself he was done fighting other men's battles, done being the weapon for someone else's war. Yet peace had a way of testing a man more than combat ever did. By late afternoon, the fog lifted. The sun spilled over the valley in pale gold, and the mountains stood clear and sharp against the horizon. Ryan was stacking the last of the firewood when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Ranger barked once, sharp and low. A black SUV rolled up the path, new, gleaming, its paint too clean for mountain roads. The kind of car that didn't belong here. Ryan wiped his hands on his jeans and watched as the vehicle stopped a few yards from his porch. The engine idled, purring like a beast. Then the door opened, and Vincent Ward stepped out. Ward looked like a man carved from marble and arrogance. Mid-50s, tall, lean, dressed in a tailored charcoal coat and polished boots that gleamed like obsidian. His silver hair was slicked back, revealing a face both handsome and cruelly composed, cheekbones sharp, eyes a cool gray that saw everything and felt nothing. He carried himself like someone used to boardrooms and bodyguards, his posture that of quiet dominion. "Mr. Hale, is it?" Ward's voice was smooth, rehearsed, public relations wrapped around menace. "I've been meaning to visit. Lovely piece of land you have here." Ryan nodded once, guarded. "You came a long way for a compliment." Ward's smile deepened, all teeth and calculation. "I came to make an offer. My company, Ward Development, is investing heavily in the region. A ski resort, private lodges, even an airstrip. Your property sits right in the heart of our expansion map. I'm prepared to offer you 3 times its market value." Ryan crossed his arms. "Not interested." Ward's brows lifted in polite disbelief. "You don't even want to hear the number?" "I heard it." A flicker of irritation passed behind the businessman's eyes, quickly masked by a smile. "I admire independence, Mr. Hale. It's rare these days, but I'd advise you to reconsider. Progress has a way of catching up to those who try to stand still." Ryan met his gaze, unblinking. "So does trouble." For a long moment, silence held between them, the wind sighing through the pines, the faint crackle of the cabin's chimney. Ward finally nodded, conceding nothing. You have my card, he said, slipping a black business card onto the porch railing. Think about it. I'd hate for this conversation to turn unpleasant. He turned back to his SUV, the gravel crunching beneath his immaculate boots. The car's headlights flared briefly, then disappeared down the mountain road, leaving behind a trail of unsettled dust. Ryan stood motionless long after the sound faded. The valley felt different now, colder, as if the man had stolen something intangible from the air. Ranger sat beside him, ears perked toward the road, tail still. Ryan reached down, resting a hand on the dog's shoulder. Looks like we've got company, partner. The sun dipped behind the ridge, and shadows gathered like old ghosts across the forest floor. For the first time since he'd come to Silver Valley, Ryan felt the quiet wasn't peace at all. It was the calm before something he'd hoped never to face again. The morning sun broke weakly through the mist that blanketed the valley, turning the silver pines into pale spires of glass. Ryan Hale drove his aging Ford pickup down the winding dirt road that led to Copper Creek, the nearest town to his cabin. The road was half swallowed by fog, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, his head resting on the window frame, ears twitching with every distant echo. Ryan's mind replayed yesterday's encounter with Vincent Ward, the man's voice, smooth as oil, yet cold enough to freeze a river. Peace, he thought bitterly, never lasted long for men like him. Copper Creek revealed itself gradually, a cluster of brick storefronts and faded signs clinging to the main road like relics from a forgotten decade. The once bustling logging town had been dying for years. Now, new banners hung on several buildings. Ward Development, Building the Future. The sleek font looked out of place against the cracked wooden facades. Ryan parked in front of Miller's General Store, its sign sun-bleached and hanging by one chain, and stepped out into the chill. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. The store smelled of coffee, sawdust, and something old, perhaps resignation. Shelves lined with canned goods and hardware tools stretched to the back. Behind the counter stood Gus Miller, the owner. Gus was in his late 50s, a stout man with a round face, gray hair tied back, and eyes as curious as they were kind. He wore suspenders over a flannel shirt that strained slightly at the buttons. "Well, if it isn't the man from the ridge," Gus said with an easy grin. "Haven't seen you in months, Ryan. Thought you'd gone full hermit." "Almost," Ryan replied, setting a small list on the counter. "Coffee, flour, kerosene, dog food, same as before." Gus nodded, scribbling notes on a pad. "Heard you bought that old cabin from the McCrae estate. Folks said nobody would last a winter up there alone." "I'm not alone," Ryan said simply. Ranger, sitting by the door, thumped his tail once, as if confirming the statement. As Gus gathered supplies, a silence hung between them, uneasy and watchful. Finally, the storekeeper lowered his voice. "You might have noticed the signs. Ward's been busy. Bought out the lumberyard last week. He's got men surveying land all the way up to your ridge." Ryan said nothing. He didn't need to. The warning in Gus's tone matched the one in Beck's voice yesterday. Trouble was coming, and it wore a polished smile. The door creaked again. A woman's voice, calm but commanding, filled the air. "Morning, Gus." Ryan turned. Standing by the counter was Sheriff Olivia Dunn. She was in her mid-30s, tall and athletic, her dark brown hair tied back in a low ponytail beneath a wide-brimmed tan hat. Her face carried the poised sharpness of someone used to being underestimated, a blend of strength and, fatigue. Her skin was tanned from long patrols under the Colorado sun, and her eyes, hazel and direct, studied Ryan the way a sniper might study a target. Measured, never hostile, but never careless. "Mr. Hale," she said. "I heard you finally came down from the ridge." Ryan gave a polite nod. Needed supplies. She walked closer, the heels of her boots clicking on the old wooden floor. "You had a visitor yesterday, Vincent Ward." Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. Word travels fast. In a small town, it travels faster than sense. She leaned a hip against the counter, folding her arms. "I'm not here to pry into your business, but Ward doesn't take rejection kindly. A few folks who refused to sell woke up to broken windows, dead livestock, or worse. No proof, of course. Just coincidences." "Coincidences," Ryan repeated. "I've seen those before. They tend to bleed." Olivia's gaze softened just a fraction. "I read your file, Hale. You served with distinction. Then one day you just walked away. I don't know what happened out there, but I do know this valley doesn't need another gunfight. So if Ward or his people give you trouble, call me first." She pulled a business card from her pocket and slid it across the counter. "That's my direct line." Ryan stared at the card before taking it. "Thanks, Sheriff. But I try not to make a habit of calling for help." "Yeah," she said quietly, pushing off the counter. "That's what all the tough ones say, right before they do something stupid." She nodded to Gus, tipped her hat, and left. The bell over the door rang again, sharp in the silence. Gus exhaled slowly. "That woman's got brass in her veins. Keeps this town from eating itself alive." Ryan gathered his supplies, paid in cash, and loaded the truck. As he started the engine, he caught sight of Olivia across the street, talking to an elderly couple. Even from here, she looked like someone carrying the weight of everyone else's mistakes. He respected that. It was a rare thing. The drive back wound through narrow roads shadowed by pine. Halfway up the ridge, Ryan slowed as he saw movement ahead, 3 motorcycles idling by the roadside. The riders were young, loud, and carelessly dressed in leather jackets and denim vests with iron skull patches. The leader, Liam Ward, was unmistakable. He was around 20, tall and broad-shouldered, with tousled blonde hair and a face that hadn't yet learned consequences. His jawline was too clean, his grin too proud. He leaned on his bike, spinning a silver ring on his finger. A habit of boredom more than nerves. Ryan stopped the truck. Liam sauntered forward, his boots crunching gravel. "Afternoon, mountain man," he said with a smirk. "You're the guy who told my dad to shove his offer, right?" Ryan didn't answer. Ranger growled softly in the passenger seat, teeth bared just enough to be understood. Liam looked at the dog and chuckled. "Cute. Old Mutt still got teeth, huh?" The 2 bikers behind him, thin, tattooed kids smelling of gasoline and arrogance, snickered. One of them kicked over a fence post along the road, splintering it. Ryan's voice came out low, even. "You boys lost?" "Not really," Liam said, stepping closer. "Just exploring. My dad says this valley's gonna change soon. Figured we'd come see the past before it disappears." He tapped a finger against the truck's hood. "Nice ride. Shame if something happened to it." Ryan's gaze didn't waver. "You should go home, kid." Something in his tone, not anger, but calm certainty, made Liam pause. He wasn't used to being spoken to that way. For a moment, the boy's bravado faltered. Then, covering it with a grin, he shrugged. "Relax, old man. Just friendly talk." He climbed back onto his bike. The engines roared to life, loud enough to shake the trees. As they peeled off down the road, one of them threw a rock that clanged against Ryan's door. Ranger barked once, lunging forward, but Ryan put a hand on his collar. "Easy," he muttered. "They'll be back. Sooner or later." When he finally reached his cabin, the sun was dipping low, staining the valley in orange and blood-red light. He unloaded the supplies, stored them neatly, and sat on the porch with Ranger lying at his feet. The forest was quiet again, but not peaceful. Quiet in the way a battlefield was quiet before the next shot. Ryan turned the sheriff's card in his hand, reading the embossed name under the fading light. Olivia Dunn, Copper Creek Sheriff's Department. He tucked it into his pocket. For the first time since he'd arrived in Silver Valley, he felt the faint hum of an old instinct, the one that never really left. Watchfulness. The sense that something was moving beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And as the last light slipped behind the ridge, Ryan Hale, once a man running from ghosts, realized he might have just found new ones. The sun was sinking behind the jagged peaks when the forest began to hum, with the low, throaty growl of engines. Ryan Hale was chopping kindling behind the cabin, the rhythmic strike of the axe blending with the evening wind. Ranger lay nearby, ears twitching at every sound. The quiet that had settled over Silver Valley all afternoon suddenly fractured. Faint at first, then rising, the unmistakable snarl of motorcycles climbing the ridge road. Ryan froze, the axe suspended mid-air. The noise wasn't from the highway. It was coming straight toward his land. He dropped the axe and reached for the shotgun by the porch door. Ranger was already up, growling low, his hackles raised. The first headlight sliced through the trees, then another and another. 3 bikes roared into view, their riders laughing over the engines. The lead bike was black with a silver skull painted across the tank. Liam Ward. Ryan stepped off the porch, keeping his weapon lowered but ready. "You boys have a strange sense of direction," he said evenly. Liam revved his engine and cut it off, the silence that followed louder than the noise. He dismounted, flipping up his helmet. The smirk he'd worn in town was gone, replaced by something meaner. His eyes glittered in the dying light, reckless, entitled, just like his father. "Evening, mountain man," he called. "Nice place you've got here. Thought we'd take a look around." "You're trespassing," Ryan said. "Turn around and go home." Liam's 2 companions, Eddie Price and Jax Mercer, grinned behind him. Eddie was tall and stringy, with a permanent sneer and tattooed arms full of cheap ink. Jax, heavier and slower, had the dull eyes of a man who'd never questioned an order in his life. Eddie lifted a baseball bat from his back and balanced it lazily across his shoulders. "Relax, old man," Liam said. "We're just here to talk." He walked closer, boots crunching over gravel. "My dad says you're being stubborn about that land of yours. I told him maybe you just needed a little motivation." Ryan's grip on the shotgun tightened, though he didn't raise it. "Tell your father this isn't a negotiation." Liam chuckled and kicked at a pile of chopped wood. "You've got balls, I'll give you that. But you don't understand how things work here. This valley belongs to Ward Development now." He turned to his friends. "Show him what happens when people don't listen." Before Ryan could move, Eddie swung the bat at a water barrel, sending it crashing down. Jax tossed a glass bottle against the cabin wall. Shards scattered, the sound slicing through the dusk. Ranger barked furiously, lunging forward, the growl deep and primal. "Stay," Ryan commanded, but the dog was past reason. He sprinted toward Liam just as the young man grabbed a metal rod from his bike. The blow came fast, cracking through the air. The sound that followed wasn't human. It was the sickening cry of a wounded animal. Ranger fell beside the stream, his body twisting once before going still. Ryan's world snapped. The shotgun roared, a warning blast into the air that echoed through the valley like thunder. "Enough!" he shouted. The bikers stumbled back, startled. For a brief second, Liam's arrogance faltered. Then he forced a smirk, stepping backward toward his bike. "You just made a big mistake," he said. You'll regret ever coming here." Engines flared again, drowning the silence as the three of them tore off down the mountain, their laughter fading into the mist. Ryan dropped the gun and ran to Ranger. The dog was breathing, barely. Blood soaked through his fur, dark against the pale stones of the creek. His eyes blinked weakly, still trying to obey, still guarding even as his body failed. "Easy, buddy," Ryan murmured, lifting him into his arms. The weight felt heavier than it ever had in training, heavier than any man he'd carried from battle. Ranger whimpered once, his paw twitching. "I've got you. Hang on." Ryan laid him across the passenger seat, wrapped in an old blanket, and floored the accelerator. The headlights carved through darkness as the truck sped down the twisting road toward Copper Creek. The small veterinary clinic sat on the edge of town, half hidden behind an old feed store. A dim porch light burned over the door, casting a pale yellow halo. Ryan slammed the truck into park and carried Ranger inside. Behind the counter stood Dr. Eliza Kovach, a woman in her late 40s with short blonde hair streaked with silver, cropped close, like she'd never quite stopped being military. Her face was angular but kind, lined with fatigue and quiet confidence. She wore a faded gray uniform top under her lab coat, and her accent carried the soft consonants of Eastern Europe. Once she'd been a field surgeon for NATO forces in Bosnia, until a roadside bombing had taken her husband and half her hearing. Since then, she'd made her home in quiet places, fixing what others broke. She looked up sharply when she saw the blood. "Set him here," she said, pointing to a steel table. Her movements were fast and precise. "What happened?" "Attacked," Ryan said, voice clipped. "Metal rod, right side. He's losing a lot." Dr. Kovach's hands worked quickly. Gauze, saline, morphine. Her assistant, a young vet tech named Maya Torres, rushed in from the back, eyes wide. Maya was barely 25, Latina, with curly dark hair tied in a loose bun and nervous hands that moved faster than her confidence. "Get me the suture kit, 2 packs," Eliza ordered. For the next 30 minutes, Ryan stood silent, fists clenched at his sides while the women worked. The smell of antiseptic filled the room, sharp and clean. Ranger lay motionless, except for shallow breaths that rose and fell like fragile waves. Finally, Eliza stepped back, pulling off her gloves. "He's stable. For now. The bone in the leg is bruised, not broken. But he lost a lot of blood. We'll keep him overnight." Her eyes met Ryan's. "You should know, whoever did this didn't mean to scare you. They meant to send a message." Ryan's jaw tightened. "They succeeded. You want me to call the sheriff?" He shook his head. "I'll handle it." She studied him for a moment, seeing the soldier under the quiet. "Men who say that," she murmured, "usually already have a plan." "I don't," he lied. When Ranger was settled, Ryan stepped outside. The town was asleep, its streets washed in the orange glow of old lamps. He sat on the hood of the truck, staring at the veterinary door. Inside, he could hear the faint hum of machines, the rhythmic beep that said Ranger was still alive. The memory of Liam's laughter scraped against his mind like glass. Dawn came pale and cold. Sheriff Olivia Dunn arrived not long after sunrise, her cruiser pulling up to the cabin where Ryan had left the damage untouched. She moved with quiet authority, her boots crunching over broken glass. The marks were obvious. Tire tracks in the dirt, footprints near the porch, a splash of blood by the stream. She knelt, running her fingers through the soil. "Ward's boys," she muttered to herself. She'd seen this pattern before, the small acts of intimidation that escalated into something worse. As she stood, The early light caught her badge, and she exhaled slowly. Something in her gut told her this wasn't random. Later that morning, Ryan returned home. He'd left Ranger under Eliza's care and promised to return by nightfall. The cabin looked different now. Still the same wood and stone, but emptier somehow, as if the forest itself had drawn back in fear. He saw the dent in the barrel, the shattered bottle glinting in the dirt, and the smear of blood by the water. It wasn't just vandalism, it was provocation. He stood for a long time, the cold air biting at his skin. The ghosts he'd buried, the SWAT raids, the hostages, the losses, rose again, whispering old truths. Violence never ends with mercy. He felt it then, the quiet inside him beginning to fracture. Ryan turned toward the ridge, where the road vanished into the trees. Somewhere down there, Vincent Ward's son was laughing, believing he'd made a point. And maybe he had. Because for the first time since he'd come to Silver Valley, Ryan Hale wanted a fight. The night was a living thing. It breathed through the cracks in the pine walls, whispering against the cabin's windows like the voice of a forgotten comrade. The wind carried the scent of rain and iron, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the coming storm. Inside, Ryan Hale sat motionless beside Ranger's cot. The dog's chest rose and fell with slow, shallow breaths. A thin line of bandage wound around his side, and a soft beep from the portable monitor broke the silence at regular intervals. Ryan's hand rested on the German shepherd's paw, feeling the faint pulse beneath the fur. "You hang in there," he murmured. "We're not done yet." He stood, the chair creaking under his weight, and walked toward the far corner of the cabin. Beneath the old cast-iron stove lay a hidden latch, invisible to anyone who didn't know it was there. He pressed his thumb against a small indentation, and the floor responded with a muted click. Slowly, a panel lifted, revealing a narrow steel stairwell descending into darkness. He flicked on the light. The air below was cold and metallic. It smelled of oil, dust, and secrecy. The room beneath was nothing like the rustic cabin above. It was concrete, lined with weapon racks, computers, and metal storage cases marked only by cryptic codes. The faint hum of old electronics filled the silence. This was Ryan's refuge, the place where the man he had once been still existed. He approached the far desk and brushed dust from a small black case. Inside were several hard drives and sealed envelopes stamped with the insignia of the Special Weapons and Tactics Division. Files that should have been destroyed. Evidence from the mission that ended his career. Operation Blacklight. Ryan inserted one of the drives into an encrypted terminal, watching as old classified logs blinked to life on the screen. Photos of desert operations, intercepted communications, and mission transcripts scrolled past his eyes like ghosts. His face reflected in the monitor's blue glow looked older, harder, more haunted than he remembered. He hesitated only a moment before reaching for a satellite phone from the drawer. Its surface was worn smooth by years of disuse, but the battery still held a charge. He dialed a single secure frequency. A number burned into his memory. It rang twice before a voice answered. "Who's calling this channel?" "It's Hale," Ryan said quietly. "You still breathing out there, Ethan?" A short pause, then a low chuckle. "Damn, I thought you were a ghost." "Maybe I am." Ethan Shaw had been his partner once, a tactical tech specialist, the youngest in their SWAT unit. Back then, Ethan was the mind that kept them alive, a wiry man with quick reflexes and quicker wit. He was 38 now, living off-grid somewhere in New Mexico. Ryan could almost picture him, lean frame hunched over a dozen monitors, dark hair pulled into a rough knot, glasses reflecting the eye glow of screens. Ethan had been badly burned in the ambush that wiped out their team, his left arm permanently scarred from shrapnel. Since then, paranoia had become his religion. "Why now, Hale?" Ethan's voice was cautious, static crackling between words. "You said you were done with this." "They found me," Ryan said. "Ward development. A front for someone bigger. They hurt my dog to send a message." There was silence on the other end. Then Ethan's voice hardened. "Ward works for Titan Group. That's the same shell corp used by Director Howard Keene. Ring any bells?" Ryan's stomach tightened. "Keene's still alive?" "Alive and richer than ever," Ethan said bitterly. "He's running Titan from D.C. Private contracts, foreign arms deals, off-the-books funding. Everything we got blamed for during Blacklight traces back to him. Ward's just his local bulldog. My guess? He's building something here. Something they don't want anyone near." Ryan exhaled slowly. The revelation didn't surprise him. It confirmed what he'd always suspected. "You still have the data?" "Most of it," Ethan said. "Encrypted copies, fragments of the original files. Enough to burn Keene if we can get proof he's active. You still have your archive?" "I kept everything," Ryan replied. "I'm looking at it." "Then we're halfway there," Ethan said. "But listen, once Keene knows you've resurfaced, he'll send more than Ward's spoiled kid after you. They'll come heavy. You'll need eyes around you." "I've got Beck," Ryan said. Ethan grunted approval. "The old Marine? He's still kicking?" "Still mean as ever." "Good. You'll need him." Ethan hesitated before adding, "Ryan, I know what's in your head right now. Don't make this personal. Keene's too powerful to take head on. You'll need to outthink him." Ryan's voice was calm, but his eyes burned cold. "It became personal the moment they came for my dog." The line went quiet. Then Ethan sighed. "All right. I'll dig deeper into Titan's financial chain. I'll call back in 48 hours. Stay alive until then." The connection ended with a soft click, leaving only the hum of the equipment. Ryan sat there for a long moment, staring at the old files, images of teammates lost, missions twisted by politics and greed. He had buried that part of himself years ago, but tonight the earth above it had been disturbed. The ghost was awake again. Outside, in the darkness that swallowed the forest, Thomas Beck watched from a ridge through his old field scope. He had positioned himself there after seeing unfamiliar headlights on the main road an hour earlier. His movements were silent despite his age, his breath steady even in the cold. The rifle beside him, a battered M40 Marine sniper, rested across his knees like an old friend. Through the scope, he caught glimpses of motion. A pair of black SUVs moving slowly along the outer fence line of Ryan's property. Their headlights were off, but the faint red glow of brake lights betrayed them. Beck adjusted the focus, noting the silhouettes inside. Men in dark tactical gear, the kind who didn't bother with badges. "Well, Hale," Beck muttered, lowering the scope. "Looks like your quiet life's over." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small radio. His voice was calm but urgent. "Hale, this is Beck. You've got company. 2 vehicles, east perimeter. Looks like recon, not assault. Yet." Ryan's reply came seconds later. "Copy that. Keep eyes on them, but don't engage. I'll lock down the cabin." Beck smiled grimly. "Wasn't planning on asking permission." He settled back into position, finger brushing the trigger guard. The forest around him was a sea of whispers and shifting shadows. He could feel the tension thickening in the air, the kind that came before a storm or a firefight. Back in the cabin, Ryan powered down the terminal and sealed the hatch. The surface world felt heavier, the silence oppressive. He checked every window, every lock, every weapon. When he finally sat again beside Ranger, the room glowed faintly from the fire's dying embers. The dog stirred weakly, eyes fluttering open for a heartbeat before closing again. Ryan reached down, resting a hand on the shepherd's head. "You did good, partner," he said quietly. "Rest while you can." His gaze shifted toward the window, where the faint outline of Beck's Ridge was just visible under the moonlight. Somewhere out there, unseen predators moved closer. The war he thought he'd left behind had found its way back to his doorstep. He leaned back in his chair, the pistol heavy in his lap, and watched the fire burn itself out. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger, eyes hard, jaw set, the ghost of the man he once was staring back at him. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. The night smelled of rain, gun oil, and destiny. Ryan Hale waited, silent and still, as the past came knocking. The first drops of rain fell like whispered warnings across the pine needles. Within minutes, Silver Valley was swallowed by thunder. The storm arrived not with grace, but with fury, the kind that tears through mountainsides and drowns the forest in chaos. Lightning flashed above the ridge, white veins crawling across the black sky, illuminating the cabin for a fleeting second before plunging it back into darkness. Ryan Hale stood by the window, rifle in hand, watching the storm roll in. The old instincts had taken over completely now, his mind calculating lines of sight, fields of fire, angles of approach. On the table beside him, his radio crackled. "Ryan," came Ethan Shaw's voice, sharp through static. "Thermal shows movement. 8 heat signatures, west perimeter, closing in slow. They've got suppressors, professional gear. Whoever hired them paid top dollar." "Ward's money," Ryan replied quietly, "and Keene's orders." "Copy that," Ethan said. "They're spreading out, flanking pattern. You've got 5 minutes, maybe less." Ryan moved quickly, every motion economical and silent. He checked the traps he'd set earlier, tripwires linked to magnesium flares hidden beneath the underbrush. They wouldn't kill, but they'd light the night like fire at dawn. On the porch, he placed 2 claymore charges, angled toward the main approach. His face was calm, his breathing steady. He wasn't nervous. He was awake. The ghost inside him was alive again. Behind him, Ranger stirred. The shepherd lifted his head weakly, one ear twitching at the sound of thunder. His wounds had begun to heal, though he still limped when he tried to stand. Ryan crouched beside him, running a hand over his fur. "Stay here, partner. Not tonight." Ranger gave a low rumble, as if he disagreed, then lay his head back down with a reluctant sigh. Outside, the forest churned under the storm. Through the rain, Ryan caught glimpses of shadows moving between trees, coordinated, disciplined. The mercenaries came like phantoms, their black tactical suits blending into the night. Their leader, Mason Briggs, moved at the front of the column. He was in his late 30s, tall, with a scar bisecting his jaw and a calm that bordered on unnatural. A former special operations soldier turned private contractor. Briggs was the kind of man who measured success in silence and body counts. Years of war had hollowed him, leaving only precision. He motioned to his team with 2 fingers, signaling formation. 8 men in total, each armed with suppressed carbines, night optics, and radio comms. They advanced in pairs, eyes scanning through the curtain of rain. Briggs's voice came over their channel, low and steady. "Remember, the target's ex-SWAT. He's trained. Don't underestimate him." The reply was a crackle of acknowledgement. The team moved in a staggered line through the ferns, boots sinking into wet soil. Lightning flickered. Again, enough for Ryan to see them, crouched and closing. He took a breath, whispered, "Now," and triggered the first switch. The forest exploded in light. Magnesium flares roared to life, bathing the trees in white brilliance. For a heartbeat, the night turned to day, and in that instant, Ryan fired. The first shot cracked through the downpour, cutting down the nearest man before he could dive for cover. Chaos erupted. The mercenaries shouted, breaking formation, firing blindly into the glare. "Contact! Northwest!" one of them yelled. Ryan moved like a phantom through his own maze of shadows, firing twice more before ducking behind a fallen log. The rain turned the soil to slick mud, splattering his face and rifle. He could hear the hiss of bullets cutting through branches above his head. "Ethan," he said into his earpiece, "talk to me." "They're splitting," Ethan replied. 2 moving south around the stream, 3 pushing straight up the ridge. You've got 1 flanking left. Close, maybe 20 yards. Ryan pivoted just as a figure appeared to his left, muzzle flash blooming in the dark. He rolled sideways, returning fire. The man dropped, his rifle tumbling into the mud. Ryan didn't hesitate. He stripped the body of extra magazines, slung the carbine over his shoulder, and moved again. From the ridge above, thunder answered gunfire. Thomas Beck had joined the fight. His first shot tore through the night, clean and final. The mercenary on Ryan's western flank fell before he could even shout. Beck's second round came a moment later, snapping a branch near Briggs's head. Briggs swore under his breath. "We've got a second shooter, North Ridge. Take him out." The mercenaries fired toward the high ground, muzzle flashes strobing through the rain. Beck stayed invisible, shifting positions between shots. The old Marine was methodical, each trigger pull timed with thunder to mask the sound. His weathered hands didn't tremble. His breathing was as steady as it had been 50 years ago in Da Nang. Down below, Ryan caught sight of 2 silhouettes closing on the porch. He sprinted low, mud splashing beneath his boots. As the first mercenary reached the steps, Ryan hit the remote detonator. The claymore went off with a thunderous roar. Shrapnel tore through the air, shredding bark and bodies alike. The sound was swallowed almost instantly by thunder, the explosion disguised by the storm's rage. Inside the cabin, the concussion made Ranger jolt awake. The dog struggled to his feet, staggering towards the door. Despite his injuries, instinct drove him. He growled deep, the sound raw and defiant. Outside, Briggs regrouped his surviving men. 3 left, 1 wounded. Rain streaked down his scarred face as he barked orders. "Push him! Don't give him time to reset!" They moved again, weaving through smoke and steam. 1 mercenary climbed onto the porch, weapon raised, but he froze when he saw the dark shape inside. Ranger stood there, drenched and trembling, lips curled back over his teeth. The man hesitated only a second, but it was 1 second too long. A gunshot cracked. Ryan appeared behind the doorway, rifle braced. The mercenary fell backward, tumbling into the mud. Briggs fired a burst in response, splintering the cabin's frame, but Ryan had already moved. "Ethan," Ryan said between breaths. "Status." 2 left, Ethan replied. 1's wounded. The other, your lead, is moving towards the creek. He's smart. He's trying to draw you out. Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Then I'll meet him there." He slipped through the rear window and into the storm, the rain now falling in sheets so thick it blurred everything into gray. He moved low along the edge of the creek, boots sinking into the mud. Ahead, a shadow shifted. Briggs crouched behind a boulder, rifle ready. Lightning flared again, revealing both men for an instant, 2 predators in different lifetimes, now meeting in the same rain. Briggs fired first. Ryan dove sideways, feeling the round slice through the edge of his jacket. He landed hard, rolled, and came up firing. His first shot went wide, the second found its mark. Briggs staggered back, clutching his chest. Even as he fell, the mercenary's expression wasn't fear. It was respect. He managed a grim smile. "Guess the stories were true." Ryan lowered his rifle slowly. You should have stayed out of my woods." Briggs hit the ground, the rain washing the blood into the creek. For a long time, there was only the storm, the thunder rolling, the forest burning with white flashes from the last of the flares. Then, silence. No shouts, no movement. Just the sound of rain hissing on cooling metal. Up on the ridge, Beck watched through his scope until he saw Ryan step into the clearing. "That's one hell of a welcome party," the old man muttered, lowering the rifle. Ryan returned to the cabin, soaked and mud-smeared. Ranger limped to him, pressing against his leg, whining softly. Ryan knelt, resting his hand on the dog's neck. "We made it," he said quietly, "but they'll be back." Outside, the rain eased. The forest exhaled, heavy and wet. Ryan looked toward the horizon, where distant lightning flickered like a dying pulse. He knew this wasn't victory. It was only the first round. And the war had just begun. The morning after the storm was unnaturally quiet. The valley was draped in mist, and the air smelled of gunpowder and wet pine. Smoke still rose faintly from where Ryan's traps had ignited the forest floor. The battle was over, but the silence felt heavier than war. Inside the cabin, Ryan Hale stood by the table, cleaning his rifle. His movements were mechanical, almost meditative. Beside him, the radio recovered from one of the fallen mercenaries crackled faintly with static. Ethan Shaw's voice came through the encrypted channel, clear but cautious. "You ready to make this call?" Ethan asked. Ryan looked toward Ranger, resting near the fire. The shepherd had survived, though his body still trembled with exhaustion. "Let's end this," Ryan said. They'd spent the last 3 hours dissecting the mercenaries' communications. Ethan, working remotely from his desert hideout, cracked the encryption and traced the call signs. Ward's private security network used rotating frequencies, but the dead commander's radio still carried his authentication code. It was the perfect lure. Ryan pressed the transmit button, lowering his voice into the flat, commanding tone he'd once used in SWAT operations. "Command, this is Unit Lead. Target neutralized. Confirming elimination. Area secure." A long pause followed. Then a voice, smooth, self-assured, and dripping with arrogance, answered. "Copy that. I'll handle confirmation personally. Keep your position." Ethan exhaled on the other end. "You got him? That's Ward." Ryan allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. "Let's prepare the welcome party." 2 hours later, a black SUV rolled up the muddy road toward the cabin. Its headlights sliced through the fog like twin knives. Inside sat Vincent Ward, immaculate even in the wilderness. His silver hair was slicked back, and he wore a tailored charcoal suit under a long black coat. He looked more like a CEO stepping into a boardroom than a man walking into a trap. In the passenger seat sat Connor Blake, his personal bodyguard, a hulking ex-Special Forces operator with a shaved head, thick neck, and a perpetual scowl carved into his square jaw. Connor had been Ward's shadow for years, a man loyal not to morality, but to paychecks. Ward turned to him, eyes gleaming. "If Hale's really dead, we'll move fast. I want that land cleared before sunrise." Connor grunted. "Understood, sir, but if it's a setup—" Ward interrupted, his smile thin. "Then we remind him who owns this valley." The SUV stopped in front of the cabin. The forest was silent except for the steady patter of water dripping from branches. Ward stepped out, adjusting his gloves. His shoes sank slightly in the mud. "Stay here," he told Connor. "I'll confirm myself." "Bad idea," Connor said flatly, scanning the tree line. "Something's off." Ward smirked. "That's why I pay you to worry." He approached. The door. It was ajar, the inside dark. "Hale," he called mockingly, I heard you put up quite a fight." Inside, the room was dimly lit by the dying embers in the fireplace. The smell of burnt gunpowder still lingered. Ward stepped over a broken chair, glancing around with disdain. His voice echoed off the wooden walls. So this is where the great Ryan Hale made his stand? Pathetic. A sound came from behind him, a faint metallic click, the unmistakable sound of a hammer being drawn back. "Step away from the door, Ward." Ryan's voice was low, cold, and final. Ward froze. His eyes adjusted to the dark and found Ryan standing at the far end of the room, rifle leveled at his chest. Behind him the shadows stirred, and Ethan Shaw emerged from the back hallway, wearing a faded desert jacket and headset, his face lit by the faint blue glow of a tablet. He looked leaner and paler than Ryan remembered, but the sharp intelligence in his eyes hadn't dulled. "Surprise," Ethan said dryly. "The Ghost Network says hi." Ward tried to recover his composure. "You think you've won? Killing me won't stop Titan." Ryan stepped closer, expression unreadable. "We're not here to kill you, Vincent. We're here to expose you." Outside, the crunch of boots on gravel broke the tension. Connor Blake entered with his weapon raised. "Boss!" he shouted, but before he could fire, a blinding light filled the room. Ethan had triggered one of Ryan's flare traps, a brilliant flash that turned night to day. Connor cursed, stumbling backward. In 2 strides, Ryan disarmed him, twisting his arm and sending him crashing to the floor. Ward's arrogance crumbled. "You don't understand," he hissed. "You're going against people who own senators, generals." "Yeah," Ethan cut in. "And now we own your servers." Ward blinked. "What?" Ryan tossed a small hard drive onto the table. "We copied everything. Financials, contracts, weapons routes, every deal Titan made under Keen's orders. You were sloppy." Ethan's voice came through the headset again as he typed on his tablet. "And guess what, Vincent? That data just got forwarded to General Royce, your old procurement partner. He's talking to a journalist from the Sentinel. By morning, Titan will be front-page news." Ward's breath came fast, disbelief turning to panic. "You idiots! Keen will bury you both!" "Maybe," Ryan said, "but you'll get buried first." At that moment, red and blue lights flashed through the fog outside. Tires crunched over gravel. Sheriff Olivia Dunn's cruiser screeched to a stop. She stepped out, pistol drawn, scanning the scene. When she entered the cabin, her eyes widened at the carnage. Spent shells on the floor, scorch marks on the walls, the bodies of mercenaries still lying in the mud outside. For a second, she said nothing. Then her gaze met Ryan's. "So it's true," she said, quietly. "You weren't the aggressor." Ryan lowered his weapon. "You told me to call if things got bad. I didn't, but you came anyway." Olivia holstered her gun and looked at Ward, trembling under the lamplight. "Vincent Ward, you're under arrest for conspiracy, assault, and illegal contracting. You have the right to remain silent." Ward laughed bitterly. "You think this matters? Keen will walk free." Olivia looked at Ryan. "Not if what you said is real." Ryan pointed to the drive. "It's real. Ethan sent everything. Keen's paper trail leads straight to Titan's board." She nodded, already calling dispatch. "Then we'll make it official." Outside, as dawn began to rise over the soaked valley, Ryan stepped onto the porch. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with the smell of smoke and wet earth. Ranger limped beside him, tail wagging weakly. Ethan joined him, wiping the mud from his hands. "You think this'll stick?" Ryan watched the sky lighten behind the mountains. "Keen's too big to fall quietly, but we just hit the first crack." Ethan smirked. "Feels good to break something that deserves it." Ryan glanced at him, faintly smiling. You always liked a clean system. Behind them, Olivia's radio buzzed with incoming transmissions, the sound of reinforcements arriving, of justice, or at least the closest thing to it this valley would ever know. Ryan looked once more at the horizon, where clouds began to part. "It's over," he said softly. But deep down, he knew the storm hadn't truly passed. It had only changed its form. The storm had passed. The sky above Silver Valley was a pale watercolor of gold and blue, and the first rays of morning light spilled across the drenched forest like a benediction. Rain still dripped from the pine needles, each drop catching the sun before falling to the earth below. The air smelled of cedar, smoke, and renewal, the scent of a land that had survived the night. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly. Ryan Hale knelt beside the cot where Ranger lay, wrapped in blankets. The dog's breathing was steady now, no longer labored. His fur, once matted with blood and mud, had been cleaned and brushed. When Ryan reached out, Ranger's eyes fluttered open, brown and clear again, glowing faintly in the firelight. The shepherd tried to rise, but Ryan laid a hand gently on his shoulder. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "You've done enough." Ranger's tail gave a slow, thumping wag against the floorboards. It was weak, but it was life. Ryan smiled faintly, exhaustion softening the hard lines of his face. For the first time in weeks, his pulse wasn't pounding in survival rhythm. The ghosts in his head, the endless drills, the gunfire, the orders shouted through smoke, had gone quiet. All that remained was the steady sound of rain dripping from the roof. The front door opened with a creak. Ethan Shaw stepped in, carrying his laptop bag slung across one shoulder. He looked even thinner than before, his face pale from sleepless nights, eyes ringed with fatigue. Yet behind that exhaustion burned the flicker of satisfaction, the kind that only comes after surviving something no one thought possible. He glanced at Ranger and smirked. "Tough old bastard's gonna outlive us all." Ryan stood, arms crossed. "He's earned it." Ethan exhaled, setting the bag down. "It's done, you know. The files are everywhere, sent to half the damn planet. The Sentinel's headline this morning reads, 'Titan Group under federal investigation.'" General Royce gave an official statement. "Keen's in hiding." Ryan nodded slowly. "I figured." Ethan leaned against the table, rubbing the scar along his forearm. "You realize what you just did, right? You toppled one of the biggest private defense networks in the country. Keen's empire is dust." Ryan's gaze drifted toward the window, where sunlight filtered through the mist. "I didn't do it for headlines." "I know," Ethan said, smiling faintly. "But hell, it's nice to win one for once." From outside, the sound of an engine broke the calm. They both turned. Through the window, a pickup truck approached along the muddy road. The old Ford came to a stop near the porch, and Thomas Beck stepped out. The retired Marine looked the same as ever, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a weathered coat that had seen more winters than most men lived through. His gray beard was damp from the rain, and his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, softened when he saw Ryan standing. "There." Beck gave a small wave. "Heard the fireworks made the morning news." Ryan smiled. "You were part of it." "Hell, I just shot the noisy ones," Beck replied with a chuckle. Then his expression grew serious. "You did good, Hale. Damn good. Most of us fight wars that never end. You actually finished one." Ryan stepped off the porch and extended his hand. The old Marine clasped it firmly, the kind of handshake shared between men who've seen too much and lived to tell about it. "You sticking around?" Ryan asked. "Nah," Beck said, glancing towards the mountains. "Got a fishing spot calling my name. But you ever need a lookout, you know where to find me." He climbed back into his truck, the engine coughing to life. As he drove off, Ryan watched until the sound faded into the distance. Behind him, Ethan slung his bag over his shoulder. "Guess I should move too. Feds will have questions I'd rather not answer in person." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You sure you don't want a coffee before vanishing again?" Ethan grinned. "I'll take a rain check. You're better at the quiet life than I am." He turned toward the door, hesitated, then looked back. "Don't disappear completely, Hale. The world still needs a few good ghosts." Ryan gave a short nod. "Take care, brother." Ethan's boots splashed through the puddles outside as he climbed into his Jeep. A moment later, the sound of the engine joined the wind, then faded into silence. The valley was still again. Ryan sat on the porch steps, his rifle leaning against the railing, and the morning sun warming his shoulders. Ranger hobbled out slowly, stiff but determined, and settled beside him. The shepherd rested his head on Ryan's knee, eyes half closed in contentment. From the ridge, the fog began to lift, revealing the long stretch of forest bathed in light. Birds returned, their songs timid at first, then growing stronger, as if the valley itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Ryan reached down and stroked Ranger's fur. "We're still here," he said softly. "Guess that's something." Behind him, the door creaked open once more. Sheriff Olivia Dunn stepped out, her uniform neat despite the muddy path. The morning sun caught in her brown hair, giving it a copper sheen. She carried a folder tucked under one arm. "Morning," she said, stopping by the railing. "Morning, Sheriff," Ryan replied. "You're up early." "I don't sleep much after nights like that," she said, half smiling. Then she handed him the folder. "Thought you'd want to see this." Ryan opened it. Inside were printed headlines and an official notice. Titan Group assets frozen pending federal investigation. Beneath it, another report. Howard Keene's resignation, pending criminal charges. "Looks like it's over," Olivia said. "You took down an empire, Hale. The Bureau's calling it one of the biggest internal exposes in decades." Ryan closed the folder and set it aside. "I didn't want a war," he said quietly, "but they brought one to my doorstep." Olivia studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You did what you had to do. Sometimes peace doesn't come from running. It comes from standing your ground." She turned to leave, then paused on the steps. "You ever think about coming back? Law enforcement could use someone like you." Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. "I think I've filled my quota of bullets for one lifetime." Olivia smiled. "Suit yourself." She climbed into her cruiser, starting the engine. Before driving off, she rolled down the window and said, "You did good, Ryan. You gave this valley a future again." As her car disappeared down the trail, Ryan leaned back against the post, eyes half closed. The valley stretched endlessly before him, green, alive, reborn. Ranger let out a low sigh and rested his head on Ryan's lap. Ryan scratched behind his ears, the sun reflecting in his eyes like liquid gold. For a long while, neither man nor dog moved. The world had stopped demanding things from them. And in that stillness, Ryan Hale finally understood. Peace was never the absence of war. It was the courage to protect what remained after it. He looked toward the rising sun. Its light spilled across the cabin, the trees, and the worn path that led into the unknown. He whispered, almost to himself, "We're home." Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly in the form of second chances, loyal friends, or the courage to keep standing when life breaks you down. Ryan's story reminds us that faith isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about trusting that God still walks beside us through it. In our daily lives, When we face our own battles, fear, loss, loneliness, perhaps the greatest miracle is not survival itself, but the grace to love again, to hope again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs light today. Leave a comment to tell us what faith means to you, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of redemption and courage. May God bless you and protect your home with peace and strength. And